going to be discussing the future of work in a more general capacity. Over the last 4 weeks, we've discussed everything from the future of the workplace itself, the future of the compliance landscape when we think about what will that work look like in a hybrid working world where we all have this liquid footprint we heard about. And then we heard around the people side of things, right? What will happen, our mental, physical health, and how we can get back to normal type structures. So it gives me great pleasure today to welcome a fantastic MC, Scott McInnes, who is the founder of a wonderful company, a communications company called Inspiring Change, where they work on the principles of internal communications, employee engagement and storytelling to help organizations to drive great customer outcomes. So Scott, I'm going to turn it over to you, and I will join you back, everyone, after this panel with another great panel around the future of co-working. So over to you, Scott.
Thank you, Joanne. And hopefully I'm going to share this screen and you're going to see this. Yes. Everyone see that?
Yeah, good.
Yeah.
Bingo. Okay. Zoom needs to have a button that says, yes, we can see your slides, to save all the presenters in the world having to ask, can you see my slides? Okay. Thank you very much, Joanne. That was great. Listen, you're not going to be listening to me for the next hour, which is a bit of a godsend. We've got an amazing panel that I'm going to pull on in about 10 minutes, but I wanted to just set the scene a wee bit before we did that. As Joanne said, my name's Scott McInnes. So I run Inspiring Change. We're all about connecting people. And for me, I think that's what we've missed over the past 15 months, 16 months. Yes, we've missed holidays and some people have missed shopping. Not me. I hate shopping. We've missed restaurants and bars. We've missed going out. But actually, the main theme that runs through all that is that connection with people, being able to meet people, shake a hand, have a hug, that kind of stuff. So for me, connecting people is really, really important. Today, we're here to talk about the future of work. But before we talk about that, I want to go back about 600 years, back to Japan. Back 600 years in Japan, and back to this whole idea of kintsugi, which some of you may have heard of before. Kintsugi is this Japanese art of basically taking something that was broken, a bowl like this that had been perhaps dropped on the floor, or a vase or a plate, some piece of pottery, amending it, putting it back together with a lacquer made with platinum or gold or silver or another precious metal to basically get you back to something which is more beautiful than it was before. It's better than it was before. And what's really interesting from an analogy perspective, when you think about what happened over the past 15 months, in some ways it did break our society, it did break our organizations, it broke our relationships with people. But now, looking forward, how can we take what happened? What were the good bits that happened over that period? And how can we take those and do a bit of kintsugi on our own businesses and make them better and more fit for purpose as we look forward into the next 100 years, 20 years, 50 years, however long your business is going to be there. So for me, it's about how do you take what we've learned over the past kind of 15 months. How do you take that? How do you process that? And how do you then take that forward to make your business even more successful? So what have we learned? We've learned loads. We've learned that we can work and deliver this way. We've learned that trust is a huge barrier to remote working. We were dropped into it. Literally one day we were all in the office. The next day we were all at home. And people just got on with things. We've learned that work is something you do and not somewhere you go. You can work from anywhere. And of course, there was an opportunity in that chaos, an opportunity to try new things, to experiment. You know, I don't think that lots of organizations, for example, will go back to full training in a room with people where they're pulling people from all parts of the country and all around the world. I think we're going to end up with some kind of hybrid model, which is going to save time and effort for people attending training and save money for organizations. Leaders had to adapt and change, and we know how key they are when it comes to running organizations. That blend of home and work life is really important. But as I said at the top, we've missed that human connection. And of course, we know from all the research that we've seen that a very large percentage of people, it's up in the 70s or 80%, want to see a hybrid model when they go back. Although I did see some research yesterday on the BBC that suggested that might last maybe for 2 years. And then after that, perhaps we'll go back to where we were pre 13th of March last year, back to that kind of 5 days a week in the office. Will we? Won't we? I don't know, but things are certainly going to change. I did a session with Kevin a couple of months back, and one of the things that we talked about was this whole idea of future of work transition programs and things that organizations need to think about. I'm not going into all of these in detail. I'm going to just pick a couple of key ones out because I think that afterwards, Joanne will be happy to send on these slides and they can be sent around to attendees. There's a few things that in order to be really, really strong, have a really strong hybrid working model and a really strong future of work position as an organization, there's a few things that are really, really important to consider. That one for me, top left, clear leadership vision and principles, is so fundamentally important. Where are we going as an organization? Why should you come on the journey with us? What's it going to mean for you? Because it's not selfish, it just is. People care about what's in it for them. Having clear and honest communications and engagement strategies, so keeping people engaged and on the journey is very important. Middle one in the middle column, openness to experimentation. You know, people say to me, you know, I often talk to leaders and well, people are asking me what we're going to do and how it's going to work and, you know, how we're going to get there. And the answer is, I don't know. You have to tell them, I don't know. Well, that's a sign of weakness. No, it's a sign of honesty. None of us have been here before. We haven't done this before. No leader on the planet can be expected to have the answer about what a future of work program looks like and it be the categorically right answer. So that experimentation piece is key, and making sure we communicate that is really, really important, because what we don't want to do is set an expectation of we're going here and that's categorically where we're going, and then have to change and then have to change and then have to change, because that does upset people. But if you can say to people, we're going to experiment, we're going to try things, and if those things don't work, we're going to try different things, then that's a different story. That's a different positioning to give to people. Probably one more. Over to the right-hand side, a focus on management involvement, support, and enablement. You know, that people leader piece is so fundamentally important. Making sure that we've given the tools to the people leaders, making sure that managers have the tools, the knowledge, the confidence, the skills to bring their teams on this journey. You know, what do you do if you've got a team meeting and half your team is in the office and half your team are dialing in? Do you make everyone dial in? Do you not have a team meeting that day? What does that look like? So having those conversations, and they may seem like silly little things, are really, really important. And I think this is a quote that that Kevin put into the slide just before we did our presentation from Callie Williams. Big question, what do we need to get done and how and where do we do it best? That should underpin everything when it comes to a future of work program. Does it make sense to drag somebody a 2-hour commute from Kildare into a Dublin office to make phone calls for the day? No, of course it doesn't. That's insensical. They could do the phone calls from home if that's all they're doing. But if we're doing a team meeting, does it make more sense to do that after a 2-hour commute into town, maybe once a week or once a fortnight? Yes, maybe. But it's up to people. It's absolutely up to people. And that's what we're finding now. And you're seeing people like Apple, you know, Tim said he wants everyone back in the office. The employees said, we're not doing it. So interesting that, you know, we've got organizations forcing people down a path and the employees really pushing back. And in organizations maybe like Apple, that's not something you'd have expected to see. Now, we are going on a journey, but before we kick off, before we start, we've got to stop, because it's easy to run into this and say, well, that's fine. We'll just let everyone do 2 days a week from home. Done. Let's move on. But actually, it's really important to take some time to think and plan before you act. It's really important to pause, just to take time, just to think about what actually could we get from this for our employees, for our organizations, and for our customers. Because this is an opportunity not to be wasted. We've been working the way that we worked pre-March last year. We've been working that way for 100 years. So what can we do now? What can we actively, I've been using this term a lot recently, awareness precedes action. Awareness precedes action. What are we more aware of now? And what do we need to think about before we just take action, rather than just taking action? It's not to be wasted. So I'm not going to run through this. This is something that we'll send out after via Joanne. Again, something that Kevin and I put together, which was a framework for organizations to think about how they can build a future fit model for them. Because no two are going to be the same. No two models are going to be the same. No two teams models within an organization model are going to be the same. So for us, the four big things were creating a compelling vision, marking out the pitch, so setting expectations and building that foundation, doing a bit of testing and experimentation, engaging, enabling, and empowering teams, because that's really important. Doesn't matter what format you put in place or what framework, actually saying to your teams, well, listen, here's the ball. Within the framework, within the pitch, you go off now and score the goals in the best way that your team can. And then, of course, maintaining momentum, because this is not a once and done. We're going to be learning, changing, experimenting, moving on, moving sideways, going back a bit, going forwards. So maintaining that momentum is really, really, really important. Just to finish up, then, for me, this whole process is not about boiling the ocean. It is not about turning your organization upside down. It is not about absolutely changing fundamentally your customer model. Or maybe it is. Or maybe it is about all those things, because actually what's interesting is that it's going to be down to each individual company and each individual team to decide what future of work looks like for you and what it looks like for your clients and those organizations that you work with. You know, it could be that you already have a really strong purpose and a really strong culture, but it's just a couple of your values you need to focus on a little bit more. So for me, it's about not boiling the ocean. It's about doing a couple of things, trying a couple of bits, seeing do they work, trying another couple of bits, and just thinking about, is this getting us closer to where we need to be or further away? And if it's further away, we change and we pivot slightly. So that's it from me. I'm now going to haul in my panel pals. And I'm not sure, Joanne, will I kill my slides for this bit? Is that better?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, there we are. So I'm going to introduce, in fact, I might let them introduce themselves. Can they be, here we go. Look, we're getting all spotlighted up.
Yeah, Kevin.
There we go. There's Gillian. So we just need Gillian, Kevin. There's Kevin and Denise.
There she is. Got her now.
She's buried in there.
There we go.
There she is. She's buried in there somewhere. Denise, is that a gamer's chair that you've got? It's very funky. You're on mute. We couldn't have got through this without saying you're on mute at least once.
Yes, I'm on Xbox a lot of the day for good therapy, you know.
You're on Xbox a lot of the day. Good, good. Well, it's important that you take time for yourself. Absolutely. Exactly. Thank you all for being on the panel. I just kind of set the scene there a wee bit. But what I'm hoping is that we'll dive into a few questions. I've got a few here. I'm going to check the chat in a second and see if there are any questions there. In the audience, please do stick some questions into the audience. If there's anything that the panel say over the next kind of 40 minutes or so, or anything that I said in the open, stick in a question. And what I'll do is I'll keep a track on the chat, and I can lob those questions into our panel like little grenades. So let's kick off just really easy by just maybe going around my screen, maybe just who you are, where you work, what you do would be fab, just so that the audience knows who you are. So top right, I've got Gillian, if you want to kick off.
Yeah, hi, I'm Gillian French. I'm working for a company called Telecom, which is an Irish business, global connectivity software company in approximately 10 million devices. We have 180 employees headquartered in Dublin, and I'm the Chief People Officer. So I look after all things people related within the organization.
Thanks, Gillian. Kevin.
Hi, everybody. Kevin Empey. I'm founder and managing director of WorkMatters, which is a training and consulting firm specializing in future of work, changing world of work, which was an interesting, there was a sort of a pre-COVID existence to that and a post-COVID existence, but set that up in about 2017. My last corporate job was head of HR and talent consulting for Willis Towers Watson. But I had got interested in the whole future of work and the kind of practical implications of it all about 10, 12 years ago. And moved into this territory full time, I guess, with WorkMatters in 2017. And as they say, the future is not quite what it used to be. So obviously adapting to everything COVID like everybody else. So look forward to the conversation.
And I'm sure you're too humble, Kevin, to say it. I'll say it. And a published author as of literally this week or next week. So if you want to see some, bits and bobs on Kevin's book called Thrive, all about working in an agile world, then just pop along to his website and click on Thrive in the navbar. So
just happens. I just happened to
look,
see
you
a
just got
copy.
one there.
Yeah, I just happened to have a copy there. You're very
You know
good,
what, Kevin. Most people with a published book have it on the bookshelf behind them, so we can all see it.
Oh yeah. Oh wow.
I'll put an invoice.
I need your advice. I need your advice. Yeah.
Yeah, a bit of PR consulting. Denise.
It's very hard to follow that now, I have to say. My name is Denise Black. I'm the HR Director for InvestNI, and we're the Regional Business Development Agency. And basically our role is to grow the Northern Ireland economy. And we do that by sort of helping new and existing businesses compete internationally and then attract new investment into Northern Ireland. So we do that through 620 staff that we have across Northern Ireland. But then we also have teams in 7 cities in USA, Dubai, Europe and Asia Pacific. So I had the joy of joining on the 20th of April 2020 in the middle of COVID. So it has been the most surreal 14 months of taking on a new role, and especially a people role, when I've been in our headquarters, which some of you may have seen on Line of Duty, for any Duty fans. AC12 was in Bedford Square, our building. That's my claim to fame. A total of 10 times. So it has been a very interesting year and very much now focused on how we return to work. So delighted to be here today.
Great. And I'm hoping that I won't have to say hold your wished at all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hold your wished.
Hold your wished.
Hold your
We say it different in Glasgow. We say it a bit differently in Glasgow, but that's okay. That's all right. Let's kick off. We're gonna, as I said, let's hang on and see. You know, we'll get going and we'll see, are there any people in the audience that want to ask a question? But let me kick off with this, because I'm conscious that within the Ireland Together membership, there's lots and lots of smaller companies. And I just wonder, what for smaller companies do you think the future of work is going to look like? You know, realistically, is there going to be any real change if you're in a smaller company? Kevin.
Gosh, well, I think one of the things I think you said there, Scott, which I think is really important for us all, and something I've been working with companies large and small over the years, is what does the future of work actually mean for you in your specific circumstances, in your specific industry, etc. Because for me, it's actually a bit of an annoying term. It's a label of convenience that actually there's no definition to future of work. It's just this label we put on everything that captures anything from robotics to artificial intelligence to multiple generations at work to hybrid working. Now, of course, it's like a horse race. It's come up to first place probably in all of the things we think about. But when you strip it all back, and I don't know how many hundreds of people have asked about what does it actually mean for you, a couple of basic realities come out, and I wonder, and I'd be interested in your views, but that they're kind of common for us all, in the sense that, because the future of work didn't start with COVID. It was already happening before. There was things happening, and it will continue way beyond COVID. So what are those things happening? And a couple of them was the idea, the business interruption is normal. The sort of frequency of change is happening much quicker. The need to be able to execute in the short term and deliver profit and results for clients and customers now, while keeping an eye on the periphery, has become such a more important skill set, if you like, or necessity. You can't just deliver and then expect the world to stay the same. So there's something about business interruption being normal. This idea of agility being a constant kind of capability rather than an episodic kind of necessity, I think, is another one. And the idea of how and where work gets done, the options around how and where work can get done are now at an all-time high in terms of difference. And finally, I think expectations from employees and other stakeholders about how and where work can get done, about work in the workplace, those are changing and changing fast. So those are the kind of the realities I think we probably all are grappling with. But I think the very important thing is what's the context for you as a company. And I think for smaller organizations, and I've certainly experienced this in the last while, is that they were already agile, they're already adaptive, they're already future orientated, before. So it's maybe just formalizing some of those qualities that we were already good at, and also expecting that our suppliers and the ecosystem that we're now working in is going to be much more fluid and flexible and hybrid and all of that. And we probably need to be ready for that. So it's not just what's happening for ourselves in our own little bubble, but maybe an appreciation that our whole customer base and supplier base is going to be changing their outlooks as well, and the whole digital agenda. I haven't even mentioned technology because it's kind of, it's an understood, the digital agenda, as someone said, I'll finish with this. Someone said to me, gosh, the slow bicycle race towards digitalization is over, because it's just it's a given now. And I think that's one of the kind of things we need to definitely watch out for.
Yeah,
if we're not there already.
I love that idea that if change needs to be just how we do things around here, that it's not a case of, we go along and then a change and then back to normal, then a change and then back to normal. It's actually, we're going to see, just instead of big change curves, we're going to see just lots of little change curves all the time. And people have to get kind of comfortable with that, because if you're not changing, you're dying as an organization. Gillian, from a people kind of perspective, what's the future of work going to look like for those smaller companies?
I think it's a great opportunity for smaller companies. I have traditionally worked in smaller businesses that have had high growth, and you're sometimes competing with the large multinationals. And, like as Kevin just said there, being agile, being able to change quickly. Generally, smaller businesses can do things like that. They can adapt things quickly, make those changes quickly. And larger multinationals aren't able to move at the same pace that a smaller business can. I think as well for people, people are saying a lot lately about professionalism. I see this as the era of being human, and it's very, very important for people. People have really changed their perspective, and employees are now, as you saw with Apple there, they're saying no more, there's a lot of people behind this. People have changed during the pandemic. So organizations are going to change because people are behind that. They want it. I was at a webinar with EY there last week, and I think they said something like 54% of employees said they are willing to leave their employment if they don't get the flexibility that they require. So for smaller businesses, I think it's a great opportunity. If you can structure your business and give people flexibility, it doesn't add to your payroll bill. It actually builds social capital. It'll build a stronger relationship with your employees. And, hopefully you'll still be able to get the work and the work level that you need done. So I think it's a great opportunity for smaller businesses. And Margaret Heffernan wrote a book, and I think, Kevin, you were kind of alluding to it there about, it's a full ecosystem. And I agree, it's about building relationships with your partners, building relationships with your employees and suppliers, and having a really resilient business that if change does come or other change comes down the line, that your business can pivot and can rely on those relationships to adapt to the changing environment. So I think that's really important for smaller businesses, to focus on the relationships, talk to their people and get their business ready. Because one thing we know over the last pandemic is none of us, we can only plan so far, but we really don't know what's up ahead.
Yeah, great point. Thanks, Gillian. And I think what's really interesting is that maybe on one side of the fence, you've got Apple employees throwing their toys out the pram, rightly, because they don't agree with what Tim said. But in Tim's camp, we've got people like the CEO of Goldman Sachs who said, well, we just can't work in that hybrid model. That's not going to work. We'll be expecting everyone back in the office on September the 1st. How do you balance, Denise? How do you balance those two needs? The needs of a company that maybe thinks, well, we can't have the creativity and we can't have the water cooler moments, and our graduates can't learn because they're not seeing things happening. How do you balance that with people wanting to be hybrid workers, wanting to work at home a couple of days a week? Where's the happy middle ground?
Yeah, I think echoing what both Kevin and Gillian said, and I'll share our approach, because I think whether you're a small company or a larger company, it's the microcosm, macrocosm, the same approach really, I think, for each one. And we did just PPE, as I call them, people pandemic evaluation, because PPE is such an in vogue term, over the last few months, of getting groups of our staff together and asking them those questions. Okay, if we were going to work remotely long term, how would that affect decision making, team engagement, coaching and mentoring, ideation and creation roles, and your mental health and well-being? And we got all this information back and distilled it down with some very varying views. And literally 2 weeks ago, I just went out with the communication saying, okay, so here's what you told us, and here's now what we're going to trial from September, October onwards. And we're going to empower, and remember, we're an arm's length body, but still this civil service mothership sort of, you know, oversight. But I advocated that we start from a position of trust and empowerment, as the last 14 months has shown, where we've been highly flexible, because lots of organizations, and I'm previously from the financial services sector for 32 years, some of them have been a little bit more mandated that you must be in the office 1 day or 2 days a week. So I've said, let's trial that. No, we do it on the basis of 4 pillars to look at when you come into the office, and that's to connect, to collaborate, the client, and commute. So those are sort of the 4 pillars that staff will look at, and each team will look at, okay, what's my role? Does my role require lots of creation and ideation in it? Because let's be honest, you can do so much on Zoom or Microsoft Teams, but that energy in the room and the body language you can't beat. Or is my role, as we have people in strategy who spend 2 or 3 hours researching, they do not need, on your point, Scott, earlier, to drive from Newry to Belfast to sit and research. So now it is, the key is training the people leaders to think in that way, with our support of saying that, okay, how does the role impact the need? And then the other sort of phrase that I'm trying to inculcate is critical contact points. So if we're going to empower staff to say, listen, depending on your role, let's look at what are the critical contact points that we want you to be in the office, and we would like you to be in the office. So team meetings, new starts, definitely, the more sensitive HR issues, ideally, and then also, you know, performance reviews, end of years and midterms, those sort of, you know, key pieces are better face to face. But the mental health piece is a big thing I want to mention, because, you know, I think there's a lot of staff who have been very open saying, I need to get back in for my mental health. Actually, I do not want to work from home, either because 1, I'm isolated, or 2, there are 3 people in the house and I cannot get peace and quiet to do my work. So, like you said earlier, we're going to trial this and see what happens, but I'd rather start from a position of trust and empowerment. And then if it doesn't work, then we'll move into a slightly more mandated approach maybe, but I'm hoping not, you know.
And you know what? It's a wonderful place to start, because that whole empowerment piece, as I said in the intro, you know, no 2 teams are going to operate the same way. Actually, no team, singular, is going to operate the same way from week to week. So actually trusting them to get on with, look, you know what it is we have to achieve. You know where it is we're going, assuming, of course, that organizationally your communications are good enough that people do know where you're going, and they do know what's expected of them, and they do know your mission and your purpose and your overall objectives. Just get on with it.
Yeah,
we're all grown-ups. We often hear people talking about, well, treat me like an adult. Here you go. There's the ball. Go off, score the goals.
And one thing, just to, you know, I remember I did a counselling qualification, God, in the late 90s, and one of the things that really landed with me, I remember, was talking about stress, and I think it's such a live term at the moment. And the definition at that time for stress was, stress is about things that haven't happened yet, because, you know, you often get so stressed about that board or the presentation you're going to. What I think for companies that haven't made their mind up at the moment, I would urge them to, because I think there's a real, you know, when staff are still in this sort of quasi, we're having to work at home, they're wondering what will happen, what's the organization going to do. So the sooner you can give them a blueprint to say, listen, we're going to try this, you know, the shoulders drop. And I've got good feedback from the comms last week. I'm just saying, right now we sort of know what's happening, and that's good. And, you know, there's a raft of things to sort out, obviously, but I think just getting that initial message out really helps staff.
Yeah, and that idea of, here's what we're going to try.
Yeah.
Try being the operative word. And if that doesn't work, we'll change it and try something else.
Yeah.
Kevin, if organizations, large or small, don't take the opportunity to do something different with all of this, all that we've learned in the past 14 months and all that we know going forwards, what trick will they have missed? What's the impact going to be, do you think, potentially?
I think Gillian really identified it straight off, saying there about the opportunity around talent, perhaps, that actually this is now a part of the employment deal, that we can really compete on here. It's something that staff or employees are looking for that we can actually potentially facilitate better than a bigger organization can do. So there's a huge opportunity in that, but of course then the opposite is true, isn't it? That if we don't take advantage of that opportunity, we maybe miss that. There's a real sense that work, it's about accessing skills. Now, there's also the whole opportunity about getting skills, not just to come in and be part of your immediate sort of bubble, if you like, that the company is in, but actually accessing talent and expertise from anywhere around the world based on the principles of hybrid and remote kind of working. So you perhaps, and maybe you've already explored this, but there's the opportunity of a pool of talent way beyond, if you like, maybe the normal assumptions around the pool that we've worked in. So again, with both those opportunities come the threat that if we don't avail of those, our own people become equally accessible to others for that reason, that if we don't have the flexibility, then it becomes, as I said to one leadership team, it is as much a defensive play as it is an offensive play, because you're defending your talent as well from possible attraction. So there's something in that, and I really think too there's something in what Denise was saying about the trust and empowerment that she's really, there's almost, I think, Denise, what you're saying is you're actually engaging in a culture transformation as much, or a culture exercise as much as anything else, by engaging people with the problem and getting them to co-create the solution and identify the possible friction points in a grown-up way with your people is actually an incredible opportunity to engage with them on creating what the next phase is going to look like. And that could help to really build a bond and a shared responsibility for the success of the model that you're going to create. And an extra stickiness, if you like, and involved in that. And also the idea that you're showing a bit of vulnerability as well, because you're saying to them, look, we don't have all the answers. You've got to help us with this. And as a team, we've got to create this. And that for me is huge, because that means that way beyond COVID, in a year's time, in 2 years' time, you've actually used this transition experience as a way to really improve, like the Kintsugi example. You've improved something about the culture regarding the connection of it. So you're creating agility. I think this transition to hybrid is the greatest sort of example of actually agility in action in itself. And by doing that successfully, we're going to be embedding some ideas of behavior, trust, safety, leadership. We're actually embedding some of those skills for the future. But if we, to your point, Scott, if we kind of try to treat this as a top-down kind of thing, then there's a chance we might actually put people off, and they might vote with their feet.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm thinking about that talent piece, Gillian, particularly, and just what you both said there. And I think that it's funny because we're all quite comfortable now. So that the person that does my digital marketing is based in Halifax, Nova Scotia. The guy that built my website is based in Melbourne, Australia. We seem comfortable with using third parties who are wherever they are, but what change in mindset do you think it's going to take from a leadership perspective in organizations, Gillian, to get our heads around the fact that maybe our employees could also be based in Halifax, Nova Scotia, or in Melbourne, or in Barcelona, or in the back arse of Mayo?
I think the pandemic has really helped with that, because they're very hard pressed to have an argument now, because for the last sort of 15 to 18 months, it's how people have been operating, and the businesses majority have run very, very well, and we've proven that it can work. So I think if leaders are going to say that they, can't hire people or can't have people in different locations, they're really going to have a very strong framework to prove, why that role, or, they can't hire that person in that location. So I think that's important, because it has worked well. I did want to just jump onto what Denise said as well about some of the things that she set up, and I think it's brilliant, and empowering line managers, and giving them the empowerment and the trust, and I think that's absolutely critical. difficult to do remotely. We haven't met people. Generally, trust builds when you are in the organization. But the really important thing for me as CPO, and I want to ensure, and sometimes I don't hear it brought up at these type of workshops, is about presence privilege or kind of politics building in a business when people are kind of present. So for me as CPO, some of the key messages I would be giving line managers and leaders when they're going off to figure this out is that we can't have presence privilege. We can't have that because you're located somewhere differently, that you get more privilege than someone, or that you're in the office all the time. Yeah. And we've given these flexibility to our employees, but we're actually biasing them then and not promoting them and leaving them out of information. So whatever we do, it has to make sure that equal opportunities are given to everyone, regardless of the flexibility or where they're located. So I think that's a key thing, and I don't hear it coming up much at these type of seminars.
That's a great point. And I suppose that, I mean, that whole presence privilege thing, outside of just the information you get and things like that, you know, I think there might be a fear and a concern among people that, you know, because Denise is in the office all the time, that if she and I are in the running for a promotion, that she's going to be more likely to get it. So Jesus, I better get in the office as well. And then of course everyone's in the office because everyone's worried about that. Is that where that could go?
Yeah, and I think it's a big threat then to the model, because I think, you know, moving to the hybrid model or moving to a better model where people have a better standard of living and maybe have more time in their home or more time to collect their kids or do things or have their hobbies, you know, I think that's really important for us as a society, and I think it's a great move forward. But my concern is that if we don't address these things, you know, we will fall back. And the small things, like I was in the office last week, and I don't know if anyone has gone back to the office. Not everyone's back, but it was really odd because everyone kind of walked in with this great energy to meet everyone, but everyone was on Teams still. So it's all kind of like, oh, sorry. Yeah. Oh, sorry. You know, and it's, you know, they're then embarrassed that they've interrupted, and then someone's so loud on Teams and someone else is typing away. So it's still all very odd. So the etiquette of how we behave when we go back to the office and the making sure that, you know, the presence privilege, all these kind of small things have to be managed, because that's what will trip us up.
Absolutely. It's always the tiny things, isn't it? It's always the little details.
It's great too. I think one thing we have going for us in the next probably 6 months is this opportunity to experiment. I mean, when are we given that? You know, normally when we're talking about huge, big transformations, we're dictated to by, you know, deadlines, and we're also trying to deliver business as usual while doing something else. There's usually, you know, the idea of having kind of a transition period where it's expected that we're going to be a bit clunky. It's expected that it's going to kind of be a bit messy. And to take advantage of that, in fact, we know that some employees don't want to go back; they're nervous. So the idea of just bringing people back, you know, in some kind of phased way is probably is on. I know for some smaller organizations, maybe and front lines, that's not possible. But the idea of even psychologically using the next phase as a way to share experience, and to Gillian's point, absolutely coming up all the time, the presence privilege piece. And one client, for instance, who started to bring people back already, one of the things they started to notice was people were booking time seats, or booking their desks, etc. And they acknowledged that they were waiting to see who else was in that day.
Yeah.
In other words, bosses and stuff. So in other words, employees are wise to this, that they're better off being in the office when it's probably politically the right time to do that. And it's kind of like you've got this opportunity of nailing some of that stuff in the you know, early on by actually taking some data from these experiments. Yeah. And one of the things too, Scott, we've talked about too around the privilege, the presence privilege piece, is thinking mindfully about that, as Denise has been talking about too, and using technology as a leveler. So I think you're doing it too, Gillian, by you're saying, for instance, that you're actually in situ, but you're on Teams, in the sense that you're using the technology as a work canvas. And there isn't kind of an email going on after the meeting with the minutes that have been drawn up by somebody who had a side meeting with somebody else after the Teams meeting. And people outside the office are going to go, I don't recognize that. No. So we're actually using technology to do everything in the moment and to collaborate and to work together on a common canvas. And that means nobody is disenfranchised or disadvantaged by whether you are on site or not. So there's some tips and tricks, but I agree with everybody here that it's actually as much a mindset and a behavioral attitude to all this and mindfulness about all this than it is about tools and practices and techniques, but they will help. There's no doubt they will help us.
Yeah, agreed.
I think I was just going to say as well, I think, I'm, everybody's a bit scared by it. And although I did this comms last week, there was like, well, where are the guidelines? Where are the FAQs? That sort of, help us, this is all good. And I said, they will come, wait, they will come as they do. But it is about guiding, I think, tactically, that if you're going to go in for the day, maximize that day. See, make your strategic meetings with who you need to meet. And obviously there's a bit of connecting and catching up. And I think that's a very valid point, again, about legitimate tribalism. People want to sit with their own people, and we get very territorial. And so our offices opened yesterday, but I've only opened 2 floors out of the 7. And you have to book through a desk booking app where you sit. But people are like, oh, I want to sit up on my own floor, and all this sort of stuff. We're going, no, we're just minimizing at the moment, So there's a huge adjustment, I think, that people will have to, we'll all, including myself. I'm going in for my end of year this afternoon now. So I'm with the chief, he wants it face to face. So I'll be back in the building this afternoon, which will be strange. But it's nice as well. There's an excitement, and we have only 70 bookings for just opening up yesterday, which isn't a lot. So there's still a little bit of unease and people wanting to be vaccinated and stuff. So it is a real next 6-12 month journey.
Yeah. Let me move on very quickly to a question from Joanne around psychological safety, because I think that a lot of what we've been talking about here around that kind of, particularly around presence privilege and around, people in meetings and that kind of thing, she was talking more particularly around kind of co-creation and feedback loops and having psychological safety in organizations to be able to do that. I think we're going to have to focus even more on the whole idea of psychological safety. Now, I wonder, Denise, from your perspective, have you seen situations where that didn't exist and there was an issue with it? And how do you cultivate that? How do you generate psychological safety in an organization?
Well, now remember, I suppose I can give on my previous experience, but I suppose the last 14 months working remotely, I've seen the teams more virtually more than anything else. But I know even within my own team, and it goes back to the leadership style, the psychological safety is so intrinsically linked to the leadership that is adopted. And the points about, vulnerability and, authentic leadership, which those terms, although sometimes they can sound a bit cheesy, I think, authentic leadership has definitely come to the fore in the last 14 months. And I think COVID, as a leveler for everyone, no matter what grade you were, because certainly, in some organizations, that positional leadership thing is high, sadly. And now that in the last 14 months, we were all at home in our rooms, not suited and booted and corporate in your office, which gave you status if that's what it did. I think that's really helped level things, and we were all anxious and scared, whether you were the chief executive or whether you were the new entrant, and that accelerated, I think, that real authentic leadership. And certainly from a comms perspective, having worked with Scott and all his influence over the years, I asked each executive to do, we did videos on how you're coping, not the strategy. The first thing was, how are you coping? How much weight have you put on? What Netflix are you watching?
Loads of weight.
all those, and that really helped. And the feedback was, God, the leader, we're all humans, doesn't that so from that comes psychological safety. I think that sort of realness, and it's something you have to work at every single team meeting, and also the admitting when things go wrong, fail fast and move on, and senior people saying, I made the wrong call there, guys, So that's something that organizationally I'm seeing, is that a natural thing, or is it something you have to build on? So just depends on the culture of where you are. Work in progress.
Yeah, and I love that. I think it was you, Denise, and I've used it loads now, that acronym FAIL, first attempt in learning.
Yeah,
it's not a failure. It was just our first attempt in learning. That's all it was. We'll try something new. We'll try something new and differently the next time. Gillian, anything to add to that on how you can build psychological safety in an organization? I'm not going to say it.
Sorry, I was writing down that acronym. Sorry, Denise. I thought it was good.
It was just your first attempt in learning. It's fine.
So that's my first attempt of learning how to unmute myself. I don't think I was good comprehensive answer, Denise. All I can add is, you know, for us in Cubic, we communicated to the power of 10 during the period of the pandemic. Was regular comms, told them when it was going out, to build that and be completely honest and open about where the business was at, what we were going to do, explaining step by step what would happen, you know, keeping people, and they expected the comms on a Monday and a Wednesday, they knew it would come first thing in the morning. And I think that built a lot of trust within the organization, and also they knew that they would be the first if anything was going to happen. Now, like yourself, I think you've made a really good point just on the next steps. We need to be more proactive in sort of telling people what the new models would look like. We're sending out comms, we're telling them when it's coming, but we need to involve them a little bit more. So yeah, I don't think I can add any more hints and tips. It's really communication to the power of 10 whenever there's anything like that. But yeah, that's it.
Yeah,
cool.
The only thing I'd add on it, I think, and Gillian used a word, I think, which is fundamental, and the psychological safety is the trust piece and the relation. It's very basic, actually. It's do I detect that this person has my back? You know, and I can be vulnerable with this person with the information I'm about to convey. I'm going to admit something, I'm going to admit failure, I'm going to admit anxiety about something, but actually it's okay because I know they're not going to use that data against me in terms of like career limiting or that they're weak or something like that. So trust is fundamental, and the relationship piece. But and if anybody, I presume some of you, I believe you were talking about this topic, so you probably came across her work before, but Amy Edmondson is probably an authority in this area of psychological safety. She's all over YouTube, etc. So I think you'll get a lot out of that. And one of the things she talks about is that psychological safety isn't about being nice. You know, it isn't about being soft and nice and cuddly. Like it's because then there's a risk that it just becomes apathy, you know, that actually I can do anything around here and like there's no consequences to what I'm doing. So that's when maybe psychological safety is almost gone too far. It's the combination of that, you know, that comfort in someone having my back and the challenge piece. And I think so knowing that if I try something, it's going to be okay. If I fail, it's going to be okay. If I raise my hand, it's going to be okay. So it's actually, there's a stretch element to psychologicals, and I think this next phase offers us an example, an opportunity to actually improve psychological safety, because we're saying to people, we need you to raise your hand, we need you to say when something's not working, and actually it's completely okay. It's human. I'm feeling it too. You know, that relationship trust kind of circle can really flourish, I think, in the next phase, because we're all finding our way. So what better time to actually build that muscle, that psychological safety muscle? So I think it's both a solution, but also a great dividend out of this whole next phase.
Yeah, definitely. Gillian Fiona McGuire said, great to hear you highlight presence privilege. It's the unspoken fault line in the hybrid workplace. The power relationships hinge upon this piece. Completely true. And she had a question. We've actually got, I was looking at my time, we've got about 7 minutes left. I have two questions that I want to ask, one from Fiona here and then one that I'm going to finish on. Fiona's question is this: what do the panel think about the implications for gender equality in the hybrid workplace? Denise, I might throw that to you first.
Thanks, Scott.
Welcome. Under a bus.
Yeah, no, it's actually very topical because we just signed up as an organisation to the Diversity Charter Mark in Northern Ireland, and I'm getting I want to get a group together, obviously internationally, to look at some of these key areas, and one of them is that very point about promotional opportunities and location, because everything is Belfast centric in Northern Ireland. So all the staff out across the various regions always feel if you want a promotion, you have to go to Belfast. And it's the same a bit, I know, in other organisations, same in Dublin, Scott, when we worked with AIB, you know, everything was in the bank centre. Whereas now we've shown that you don't have to, it isn't location. It goes back to the point, work is an activity, not a location. So, you know, if your role allows you and you can work effectively and productively, well, then it doesn't have to be Belfast centric. So I think from a gender perspective, that will really help. And ours is the other one. How many senior roles are put up as full-time jobs, and that's it. If you want to go for it, well, then you're going to have to go full-time. And I mean, I know that way back. I'm old enough that you could only be a manager in the bank if you worked full-time. That's how archaic it was. So I think this is going to really help from that perspective, both of location and hours, and also just writing your job descriptions carefully, looking at your choice of words, tone of voice, all that stuff, about making sure it's not very, specific, and the behaviors piece is brought out as much as the technical acumen, that. So I don't know if that's answering the question, but I think there's a more positive future for gender equality on what we've seen in the last 14 months. And certainly that's what I'm hoping to do in this, diversity and inclusion group I'll set up. Brilliant.
Gillian?
I would probably have a concern. I think that during the pandemic as well, you saw a lot of stats that show females dropping out of the workplace just with the pressure of home life and the pressure. A lot of things fell on, single moms or females in the home.
Oh, do we lose Gillian? Kevin, you're there. Denise, you're there. We lost Gillian.
Temporarily, but I'm sure Gillian will come in. But maybe I just
jump in.
Continue her point, because I do share that. I was talking to Julie Cinnamon actually of Enterprise Ireland. So Denise will know same world. And it was interesting. She was genuinely concerned about this issue. That as we now bring flexibility into the workplace, that we just need to watch. We just need to keep a watch out that the numbers don't find that there's a move towards flexible working as seen as some kind of it's a positive, and we all know it's a positive, but that it doesn't become a distinguishing factor between how the gender is now split in terms of their relationship with work, their presenteeism, etc. So really important that our promotion and our development programs are agnostic to location, and that we watch out. We just watch the data. Just watch out for the data on this. I think is important. It is a concern. And I think the fact that we're raising it now is probably good. That is one of those watch outs.
Okay, 3 minutes left, and hopefully we'll get Gillian back just for this final question. And I always like whenever I'm doing sessions like this or the podcast to get really practical, to get really down and dirty and into the weeds. And just ask you this question then to close. What's the one thing that companies and leaders should be doing now? Pick one thing, the most important thing you think that they should be doing to reap the benefits of this whole idea of future of work. What's the one thing they should be doing? Denise?
Ask their staff, talk to their staff.
Okay, great. Have a conversation. Kevin?
Yeah, actually, I was going to say the very same thing. Is the idea of reaching out now and being vulnerable, showing all those things we've been talking about in the chat, reaching out to folks and engaging them, co-creating the future, getting them to say, one of the most interesting kind of survey questions we ask at the moment is, what do you think the implications are going to be to teamwork, to productivity, to the client, to the customer? Get them to reflect on this and not it be a top-down thing. So that for me is my number one as well. I agree 100% with Denise. And because I think Denise, it opens up all kinds, and that's been open to the responses that we get is the related point on that, and being open to acting on what they say, because that is going to give us such a track record of change and agility into the future. It'll have much more dividend and much more impact than just a short-term issue of getting back to work. You'll actually find it's creating something much more important for the future. So that would be my number one too, I think. And I'll throw in another one, Scott. It's just making sure the technology is there to enable this to work, because if it's going to be such an awful employee experience in terms of the engagement and communications technology that we're going to use, it's really going to tire people out. I'm talking about Wi-Fi. I'm talking about setup at home. Just making sure the basics are there for a normal work experience. The pandemic has not been normal, is not normal. People are probably working in optimal environments. So we just need to make sure that outside in experience is good. And that might mean an investment in some technology.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks, Kevin. And I think probably the one piece I would add, which is the jigsaw piece that fits together what both of you said, you know, from Denise's perspective of asking employees and speaking to employees, and from Kevin's perspective of acting on that advice and that input. For me, the jigsaw piece in the middle is what I would term link and label, is making sure that every single time we ask and then do something based on that feedback, that we tell people really obviously, oh, there's Gillian back, that we tell people really obviously that, you know, we've done this because you said this, that we're showing we're listening. It's one of the cornerstones of really good employee engagement, employee voice. You told us this, we've now done this. You said, we did. And making that really obvious for people, really, really obvious for people. Gillian, in 10 seconds, what's the one thing companies should do now? The most important thing you think that companies should do now to reap the benefits of the future of work?
Okay, I think that they need to provide flexibility. Flexibility has to happen. Employees are going to leave, but you do need to make sure that everyone is treated equally. That's really, really important. Everybody should be treated equally.
Bingo. Now catch your breath. Panel, Kevin, Denise, and Gillian, thank you so much for joining me. I thought it was a really good conversation, and thanks for me throwing you under various buses. That was very good of you. So we'll say thanks. I'll leave it there, and I'll hand back to Joanne.
Thank you very much, and thank you again to all the panelists. That was really fascinating. The takeaways for me were really around, Kevin, what you say, the future of work can mean many things. So change is now a continuum. There's no such thing as a start, middle, and end. It's just these constant waves of change that are coming, and you know, agility and flexibility is definitely the way forward, as well as, you know, hearing from Denise and Gillian around that co-creation and that feedback loops and involving people. And if you involve me, then at least I feel part of the journey, which Tim from Apple seems to have missed, strangely enough. So we'll see how that one plays out. And some really great context there around presence privilege. I personally, when I was in my corporate role, I really felt that presenteeism issue where, you know, if there was an all hands, you had to physically be in the room. And if you weren't physically in the room, there were questions about, you know, why weren't you there? Were you just not committed to being there? So it's really fascinating to see that now become a hot topic, as well as the diversity issues that are naturally created by that, you know, as more women may choose to work from home because of the work-life balance and so on. One of the questions that I was thinking, actually, Denise, with your 70 desks that were booked coming back to work, was there a gender difference?
I can't answer that. I can find out easily enough, actually. I just
interesting.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see if there were 70 desks booked, but that would be an interesting. I can find out.
Yeah, because I think that'll be a hot topic for us to talk about in the future. So thank you all very much. Really enjoyed that conversation, and thank you, Scott, for wonderful facilitation.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks, Scott.
Right, so I am going to kick off with the next session, which is focused around, you know, when we've just talked about how we're going to work, where are we going to work in the future? So I am going to share a couple of slides, nothing. So just in terms of what we talked about with the future of work, I came across this study yesterday, which is more of a global view of what's going on in the world. And there's some quite interesting trends coming out. So if you see by company size, so this is a survey of 800 global 2,000 enterprises, so quite large enterprises. But the larger the enterprise, the more they're going to work from home, which is interesting when we think about the SME market and why that is in particular. We would have thought that the technology sector was definitely the one that would, you know, go completely remote, the more technologically literate, but actually they fall quite far down the list. And so it's the telecom, life sciences and energy sectors that are more prevalent or more advanced in terms of working from home. And when we look at it by job function, the HR and salespeople are the people that are getting back to the office more. And then we're looking at the strategy and innovations teams that can work from home. These are the people that would probably do the deep work and collaborate with a smaller team, but also shared services and finance and accounting working from home. and they're hugely collaborative jobs, but a lot of that task-based work being done at home and then connecting when it feels important. So I just thought those insights were interesting as we start the next chapter. So when we look at where we will work, we asked everybody who joined up and registered for this conference to fill in 2 little questions on the way in. One of them was, where do you hope to work? And the other one was, what is your big concern? And so some of those results have been quite interesting. So almost 60% of us will work in a hybrid model, which means somewhere between home, work, and a co-working space. 27% of us will work from home. 11% of us, only like a small percentage, 10 out of 100, will work in the office, and only 3% will work in co-working spaces full-time. Now, the reason why I find this really important is because the government is really pushing forward around our rural co-working spaces and this drive to spread the remote work around the country. We've got some great regional and national drives going on around ConnectedHubs.ie and Grow Remote, and a lot of other drives that are really trying to awaken the rural communities and spread the work evenly throughout Ireland. So in August 2020, the government put 12 million in to a survival fund for enterprise centres, and only in April 2021, the government also put 75 million earmarked for 24 landmark regeneration projects in rural communities aimed at co-working spaces. So there is an enormous investment from the government going into here. So when we look at our biggest concerns, they are everything that you've just heard. So among us here, the people that are here today, these are our biggest concerns. And the first one is health and safety, by far the greatest concern among respondents. How do we control the infection? How do we feel safe when we go back to work? And will the vaccines even work? Or will we be in and out of work every time the pandemic kind of peaks and troughs? As you would expect, we have enormous concerns about the lost time to traffic and commuting. So now that we have this time back, I mean, it wasn't an option before, it was just, you know, something that was expected. We didn't know what we didn't know. And now that we've had that time back, we feel like we're losing it, and there's a sense of loss and a potential impact to our productivity. When we look at the work-life balance, which we talked about with the wonderful panel earlier on, we're worried now about how can we fit it all in? Can we even perform at the same levels as before? So we had some people from the hospitality sector thinking about going back to the hotels and going back to the restaurants and bars, thinking, can I go back to that level of chaos in my life now that I've had the opportunity to step away? So we do need to start rebuilding the structures that support us to get back to those levels of productivity as well. And then lastly, but definitely not least, is the culture and connection. And I know Scott and Kevin will have a particular interest here. So the genuine concern that the culture will suffer in a hybrid model, that how do we create that real sense of warm connection where everybody feels safe to contribute and everybody feels equally valued? And how do we stay connected and keep our teams working effectively? So I do hope that over the last couple of weeks that we have managed to touch on many of those points and keep you all very interested. I'm going to pick up with our panel today, and I'm delighted to welcome back Hannah Dwyer from JLL, who's head of research with JLL. So Hannah, welcome back to the panel. Delighted to have you here. Hannah has nearly 15 years of experience of working in strategic research and advisory roles, with an in-depth experience of all areas of economic and commercial property research. So she is at the forefront of figuring out what is happening in the workplaces around the country and beyond. So thank you for joining us again, Hannah. And also delighted to welcome Gary O'Mara, who is CEO of Meath Enterprise down here in Navan and also Kells Hub, but also chairman of the National Association for Community Enterprise Centres. And a member of the government's SME and entrepreneurship consultation group. So Gary, very warm welcome to yourself. Delighted to hear what's going on in the enterprise sector in terms of community hubs and where is all this money being channeled. So if you guys would like to just say hello to the audience and do a brief introduction and get started with a good conversation. Hannah, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I will. Good morning, everybody. Joanne did a very good introduction of me there. So my name's Hannah Dwyer. I'm head of research at JLL. So we're a commercial property company. We deal with kind of every sector of the industry, not just offices, which I know we're talking about today, but kind of retail, which I touched on the last time we all spoke, industrial, residential, and that's across all parts of property. So whether it be agency leasing, investment sales, property management, valuations, it's kind of the full spectrum of what you'd expect, I suppose, from a property agency company. But it's my job in research to collect as much information as I can, kind of speak to as many kind of clients and be involved in as many projects as possible, just to kind of get really involved in all different aspects of property, so that I can, you know, use data and insight and intel to generate some thoughts, pieces of thought leadership, and I suppose just, yeah, get an understanding of what's really happening out there at the moment. And I was on a couple of weeks ago speaking about the future of work. It's something that we are being asked a huge amount by clients, not just on the occupier side, but on the investment side, on the investor side. So I've been doing about 10 presentations at the moment. I think I'm up to going into each of the big investors across the city and kind of speaking about this hybrid model and the future of work. So it's something, even from kind of a building perspective, those guys are already asking. So it's really topical, and it's great to see groups like this talking about it.
Put myself on mute. Thank you for that, Gary. If you want to take the stage now.
Okay, thanks, Joanne, and great to be here. So yeah, my name's Gary O'Mara. As CEO of Meath Enterprise, we have a couple of facilities at the moment in Meath. We have 85,000 square foot in Navan, one of the bigger ones in the centres in the country, and we have another 25,000 square foot co-working and kind of technology kind of support space in Kells. And we're in the process of developing projects in Dunshaughlin, potentially working with other stakeholders from Slane to create another project in Slane as well. And we have plans in place. We're building a food hub this year. So that'll be 10,000 square foot. It's a work in progress. Developing food labs. We're building a TV studio. We're building a maker space for all the kind of future technology type stuff, and creating partnerships at the moment with other maker spaces. And we've planned for a new digital innovation and smart agri hub, 30,000 square foot build in Navan as well. We have planning permission going in for that over the next few weeks. And again, very much around ecosystem development, clustering, kind of the wider region, not just focused on our tenants, but working with the wider stakeholders in the community. And remote working and co-working has always been a big part of what we do in Navan and in Kells. I suppose, and with all the other remote working and co-working projects coming on stream, hopefully across the county over the next kind of 6 or 12 months, we want to do a little bit more on that. Nationally then, yeah, I'm the Executive Director and Chairperson for NACEC, which is the national body for enterprise and community centres in Ireland. So I've been in that role now since 2018. I've been involved with that group since 2012, since I joined Meath Enterprise. So I've seen a lot, learned a lot coming out of the last recession in terms of what works and what doesn't work, and sustainability for these type of projects and regional development and whatnot. And then obviously, you know, coming into a kind of strong kind of growth phase into 2017 and 18 as regional development plans and government policy and everything adapted to be more regionally focused and focus a lot on investing in these types of projects and clusters from 2017, 18 on, and then we come into the pandemic and everything changes again. A lot of these projects are closed most of last year and they're reopening slowly, and I suppose so lots of challenges, lots of research, lots of work being done, lots of interesting noise and topics and things being discussed at the moment in relation to what the sector may or may not look like, or how it can support rural Ireland in the future or whatever, but a lot to be still figured out. So very much involved in that, and very much in the middle of trying to help figure that out and play some role in trying to make sense of all that noise, but but lots of great opportunity out there at the moment as well. So that's probably it. And there's lots more to do. But anyway, we'll stick with that for the minute.
Thanks, Gary. I think it's really interesting to see that we've made this big play and this big push for rural development and specifically enterprise hubs and co-working spaces. And it's great to see that they're actually mixed use as well. So they're not all just, you know, office-based spaces. There's spaces for people to do ideation, or like you said, maker spaces for prototyping. And one of the things we were discussing within the Ireland Together community is this, like, how can we use our own co-working spaces? We have a lot of private co-working spaces around, and how can they have mixed use space there where it's collaborative, but also they can make money out of it because this is a business for a lot of people. One of the areas we were thinking about was what you just mentioned there, which was the video hubs, you know, places for people to come and record their training or give a presentation where they can't work effectively from home, but they want to give a keynote speech. Have you seen things like that cropping up, or is that one of the trends?
Yeah, it's certainly, we've seen hubs starting to do it now that we're all working from devices, and like I'm sitting in the car here today in between meetings or whatever, so still commuting unfortunately, but actually getting work done while I'm in the car as well, which has generally been the case. But we see now that people are working from their phones and have kind of got Zoom on TVs or whatever, we see an awful lot more of office-based or hub-based activity where people are getting the video cameras, learning how to use them, setting up mics and lights, you know, throwing the big 75-inch in the background with all your kind of stakeholders and kind of collaborators coming in on Zoom out over the speakers, and they're trying to play around with that kind of technology, and we're certainly seeing more of that ourselves. So, and I think it is the way forward. I think we have a 128-seater auditorium, Kells, for training and events that we use as part of Meath Enterprise Week and other things. A fantastic space. Obviously, it's not doing anything at the moment, but we envisage when we open it back up that, you know, we have all the technology there already, because it was always something we were hoping to do, but it just never really took off before the pandemic. We hope to have, you know, eventually that place full or half full or close enough to capacity at some point in the future, as well as bringing people in digitally and kind of interacting with people to create those much bigger audiences, which you've seen with so many events. Like, I've been involved in so many conferences over the past several months that normally would have only had maybe kind of, you know, 100, 150, 200 people max attending physically before, and all of a sudden you've still got your, you know, maybe 100 people attending physically for some of those events, socially distanced more recently, and 500 or 600 or 1,000 people coming in digitally. So the future of meetings and events has changed. I've board meetings this evening and tomorrow morning and tomorrow evening for different projects and companies, and half of those members will be physically in the board meeting room or in the boardroom, and the other half will come in via Zoom. And that's probably the way that'll always be in the future as well. So the media studio that we created in Navan, it is all about teaching people how to do this type of thing. That was always the case pre-pandemic anyway. We started building it. But also a rentable space that people can come with green screen walls and high-tech video equipment and lighting and sound equipment. We've steady cams, we've large flat screens, we've everything in there. It's a bit of a maker space for content creators and media buffs, where students or entrepreneurs or your normal Joe who's interested can just learn how to use this media, can rent the space, can rent the equipment, we can run education programs, we can interact with the schools and connect them with entrepreneurs and so many other. That's exactly what it is actually. It's a maker space for media buffs, for guerrilla film making, photography, everything. And now probably will be more relevant and more necessary to have in a hub like that than ever before, because of what we've come through over the past.
Yeah, I think so. I think that it looks like that, you know, hybrid working will fall into hybrid conferencing. So I don't think that aspect of dialing into a conference is ever going to go away, which is a huge opportunity really for a lot of people. I mean, it means that we don't have to travel to go to a conference, so we have better accessibility, but also from a conference provider's perspective, they can reach a larger audience. And the people who really value that in-person networking can make the effort to go there, but everybody else who's there maybe just for the knowledge can dial in. Hannah, I'm just wondering, if conferences will continue to adapt to that mixed presence kind of collaboration. Do you see any, large conference venues starting to think about different ways? I know there's some hotels that did pivot to using their stages or using their large conference rooms to actually, record content or deliver content online. But what about places like, the Bord Gáis Energy Centre and places where large amounts of people come together?
Well, I think one thing most people have missed due to COVID is people. So I think, the second we can all meet in those conference facilities again, I think we will do. So I don't think longer term people are going to be looking to kind of restructure conference space. But I think the point you make about hotels is quite an interesting one, something we have started to see across some of the European cities where we have offices, is hotels looking to put in flex space, so this co-working space within the hotels themselves. So a bit of an adaptation of usage there. So we do see kind of more co-working. And I think co-working is interesting because, 2-3 years ago, I was doing loads of these presentations all about flex and how it was growing and how it's a big market and how we should all be aware of it, and, big things are to come. And then last year and this year have just been really bad years for anybody working within flex. It kind of goes against all of, at the moment from a COVID perspective, do you want to go mixing kind of, a big co-working space, or do you want to sit at home? And what we've had to see, unfortunately, is that everybody is sitting at home. But I think looking ahead, we're expecting 2020 to be a phenomenal year for flex operators and for co-working spaces. I think we're going to see a full flip in terms of people using those spaces. And something I think I spoke last time when I was doing a presentation on this call was, anytime there's been a downturn, people have lost their jobs, which has happened in COVID, but people have lost their jobs. So there'll be some SME demand. There'll be people looking to set up little businesses, starting to grow, and they're looking for co-working. And then on the other side of that, there's also corporate. So large corporate companies who at the moment are trying to make decisions on their real estate, don't really know what they're going to be doing in kind of 6-12 months time, trying to formulate a strategy for the workplace that they have. And by going into a flex or a co-working space, it gives them just that. It kind of gives them flexibility. You're going into a building where there's no capex, there's no, it's a fully fitted space that you can rent on a short-term basis. For a lot of the big tech companies who need to get global board approval for leasing office space, if you can have a one-page lease from a flex operator or a full kind of property traditional lease of 25 years with a break at 10, or you can sign a 1 to 2 year commitment with flex, it's almost kind of a no-brainer. So I think sorry, my answer's kind of done a full 360, but I think in answer to your question, I don't see a kind of a change hugely to conference facilities. I think we're all dying to get back and meet people, and like this would be great if we were all in the same room drinking coffee and eating pastries instead of doing it over the internet. So I think we're all going to be going straight back to that whenever we can. But
I would say that we dialed into the pantomime at Christmas. So they recorded the pantomimes at Christmas from the Gaiety, and we normally wouldn't get to see it because it's so booked out so quickly. And we were able to stream it live at home. So that was a plus. I hope that continues.
There'll be changes, yeah. And I think as well, something else I spoke about the last time was ESG and how companies now are really focused on the sustainability agenda. I am kind of, there's one of me in every country around Europe, and we meet up and we discuss kind of strategy and intel for research. And I can't see those meetings happening again. Why would you fly 50 people to one city in Europe so you can meet? Now, I don't think, I think people interaction and collaboration is huge, but from a sustainability perspective, JLL has said that we're going to have a net zero carbon by 2030. An easy way to cut down on that is air travel. So I think there will be changes. I think COVID has definitely changed some things. I don't want to say for the better because it's been a really hard kind of 14, 15 months, but we're certainly not going to go fully back to the way we were. I think some of the ways we go about our lives personally and in work have definitely changed for the longer term.
Yeah, and I guess we didn't know that these things were negotiable before. So now that we think they're negotiable, we're kind of going, okay, well, if it's an a la carte menu of how I work, then my preference is to work a little bit more flexibly.
Yeah.
Whereas
Which comes back to the hybrid point. I mean, hybrid is meant to suit you regardless of which bits of the hybrid you sit into. You know, Joanne, you were talking about different companies, and we have a spectrum of companies that we've developed. So, you know, you have the likes of Goldman Sachs who've said absolutely no work from home. It goes entirely against our model. It won't work for our business. And then on the other flip side, you've got Barclays, who I think they made about 1,500 employees in the UK fully remote with no office work in the medium term. Yeah. So, you know, there's kind of that whole spectrum of where people sit. And I think flexibility, not just from, say, a co-working perspective, but flexibility from the time in your day, where you work, you know, it's all different elements of flexibility within the work environment. And it's about picking the bits within that kind of model that suit individuals, I think.
Yeah, and that also suit the business, right? Keep the business ticking over, because that's important too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, JLL launched last week, 2 weeks ago, a new flex for your day. So, you know, we're a big global corporate. We've just changed entirely how we go about kind of operating as a business. We had 1 day a week work from home pre-pandemic. We're now 2 days a week with a bit more flexibility within your working hours in the day. But that's a global structure that's been agreed across the whole of JLL, from Chicago to Sydney to Dublin. So just a kind of a full transition, but like, obviously, yeah, it does have to work with align with corporate objectives. I think everything we're talking about here does, whether it's the co-working, flexibility, sustainability, your real estate, the buildings you operate in, it ultimately comes down to changes within you know, the corporate agenda. And I unfortunately had a call this morning. I was hoping to listen to the previous session. I only caught the last kind of 15-20 minutes, but even from a kind of a HR perspective and how, you know, everything is feeding into that, the implications are huge, not just real estate, but across the board.
Yeah, absolutely. We had such a great discussion earlier on. Actually, my brain is alive with so many questions ever since. Just in terms of when we think about then the opportunity ahead, right? So there's large companies looking to, or maybe they're just the ones we hear about, that are pushing or distributing their work around the world and letting people work from home. Personally, in my situation, my husband's company, which is a large global company, has shut their Irish office. So he now works permanently from home in, I got first dibs on the office, so he works in the spare room. So I now have a co-worker, and sometimes we meet at the coffee dock every now and again for a chat, but most of the time we actually don't see each other at all. But I also have another friend who has just been told that she is back to work in August 5 days a week. That's the decision. So, you know, people have to, ultimately the employer has to make a decision, and that is your employment contract, and you'll need to go with it in some ways. So we just need to be open to flexibility on our side, as well as, you know, we're talking a lot about employer flexibility and what they should do, but also we need the employees to be flexible. But as I think about these larger companies, even, will there be a different relationship in terms of will they create an ecosystem around them where you will have, you know, to do it properly, distribute the workforce, have headquarters, maybe regional offices supported by maybe co-working spaces, and really drive the mobility and the work-life balance around the entire company? Is that something that you can see happening?
Yeah, I mean, that's actually something that started to happen pre-pandemic. There's a number of companies who have, you know, not just one office location, but they've multiple office locations around the city. The likes of AIB, who are based on Molesworth Street, and then they have an office out in the suburbs as well. You know, and that kind of strategy around flexibility within the real estate portfolio, I think, is a really key point. And I think it's very much dependent on the individual company. I think we've seen the point you were making then across sectors mirrors exactly the research we've done. We interviewed 160 corporates across Europe and 2,000 employees then across Europe as well. But based on the kind of sector point, you know, the strategies that each of these businesses have is just going to vary so much. Some of the tech companies have come out from the outset and just said, you know, from last March, you're not coming in until next March, or you're not coming in now until September. Other companies, so JLL, we're doing a rotation, week off, week on, the red team and blue team. So you are in the office for 5 days a week. 60% of the office are, and then we kind of rotate week on, week off. And you know, that's just kind of the way that we're doing things at the moment.
I was talking to a large company in New York the other day who were saying they're moving out of central Manhattan now, and they're going to just use the money from that building to distribute a couple of buildings around the outskirts of New York into the suburbs, which means that it's a very different strategy, right?
It is. I mean, we haven't really seen that here yet, and I don't think it will happen for Dublin, because Dublin is a really small city. At the end of the day, we are a global city and we punch well above our weight in terms of occupiers, but we're small. Like, we talk about the suburbs, but they're a 20-25 minute Lewis. Like, if you could do that in London, that's an absolute dream. If you could get on one tube and get straight to a location in 20 minutes, you're classed as being pretty central. Whereas we talk about them as being suburbs here. I mean, there's no evidence yet of companies kind of closing up shop in the city centre, and I just can't see that happening in Dublin. I think the hub here of activity is going to continue. We also benefit from a huge amount of tech companies, with a global HQ for so many: Facebook, Google, Dropbox, Yahoo, Twitter, and I think those companies thrive off being in a clustered environment with other kind of companies around them. Yeah. So I think, you know, that's going to continue. I think they're going to want to be in those locations and still place an emphasis on the real estate that they're in. And in fact, more so. I think, just to touch on a point you were talking about earlier on about collaboration, but I think, you know, the interaction of people is something that everybody has missed so much from COVID. And I think the restructuring within office buildings, whereas previously you might have had a desk, probably 60-70% of your office was a desk. I think we're going to do a full flip now. And I think 60-70% of the office is actually going to be collaboration space, because I think that's the bit that everybody has missed. So I don't think people are going to be kind of vacating city centres. I think quite the opposite. I think there's going to be a big pull into the office buildings. I think just within those office buildings, there's going to be a huge amount of restructuring to make sure that space works for workforces going forward.
Well, that gives me a wonderful segue to throw the gauntlet to Mr. O'Mara. If people stay in the cities and these offices are going to work so hard to attract the people back, you know, what is the opportunity as you see it, you know, as chairman of NACEC, what is the size of prize that you guys are aiming for?
Well, I suppose the important thing to remember pre-pandemic as well is that good co-working spaces or enterprise support centres or whatever, their primary purpose really is building some sort of an ecosystem. So it's really about supporting the local startups and entrepreneurs, potentially the local SMEs. So like we have a company in our centre in Navan occupying 30,000 square foot, started as a two-person startup in 1998, the very first company in the facility, long before my time obviously. Now they employ 350 people. And they're shipping high-tech nutritional food products developed with milk powder to China and pretty much most of the world. Lots of really high-tech jobs. And we're building the Boyne Valley Food Innovation District and the Boyne Valley Food Hub project around that, because we've got a large-scale SME linked in and developing product for some of our large Irish multinationals from Navan that can support the development and scalable kind of expansion of smaller SMEs, whatever, into those global kind of food chains or food markets. So you mentioned earlier, like that collaboration piece and shared learning piece, the clustering, the innovation district, the ecosystem. That's really what we're all about for sure in Meath. It's about developing that ecosystem where the corporates get the opportunity to interact with the local entrepreneurs or those high potential SMEs, because the larger corporates kind of need that. And obviously, you know, the previous speaker mentioned that's why they'll stay in Dublin. It's also why they'll move potentially out of Dublin and locate in different areas where these innovation districts or clusters start to form, and co-working spaces or universities or different stakeholders will kind of play a part in helping develop that. And that's really what NACEC is trying to focus on. So we're developing a quality standards framework or system to support not just the kind of early stage kind of development of new hubs and spaces and clusters, but also then the expansion of the existing or the improvement in terms of the professionalism and the connectivity, not just with other local hubs, but across regions, across countries, and even across the world, like with Startup Genome and the global entrepreneurship networks and others that we engage with. It's about engaging with ecosystems across the globe that have co-working spaces and enterprise development spaces as part of a wider ecosystem model around universities and large corporates and governments and whatever else. So when people talk remote working and they look at it at that basic level, yes, we do provide that, and we will continue to provide for public sector employees and for people who just, you know, don't want to do that commute into Dublin and they live in Kells and they want to go local, and that's fine. We're there to support that, and we have done in the past, long before the pandemic, and those people have found and built relationships and supported maybe local entrepreneurs and local SMEs who have interacted with the hub, because what we're always trying to do, like, we don't necessarily either just let people randomly kind of walk in off the street. We've never done that. Maybe we'll have to consider a model that supports that kind of work.
That explains why I've never been down, and it's only around the corner.
Yeah, but it's all about community, Joanne. You know, it's like, you know, the employer with kind of 2,000 people in an office in Dublin city centre just doesn't randomly let people kind of come in and pull a ticket and say, yeah, I think I can do this job, and just head upstairs, grab yourself a desk and work away. There's an interview process, and it's about bringing in the right personalities, the right fit, you know, people who can deliver and help you deliver on your vision, people who can, you know, interact with everybody else that's there. It's about building a community and building a culture and building something that actually works and delivers on a mission. And I suppose that's what we're trying to do with our hubs. And part of that mission is supporting remote working and co-working in a more flexible way for those that need it and want it. But like the previous speaker said, like, I work from the car, I work from the hub, I work from home, I work from the office, wherever it may be, or from a local cafe or hotel, wherever I need to work and wherever I can work and I can get things done. Nowadays, I fit an awful lot more into my day because I'm working from the phone and the tablet an awful lot more, and everybody else is as well. So I fit an awful lot more in. As things start opening up, and now the football is back, and you know, there's lots of other activities that I'm involved in and coaching, and it's great when you have that flexibility and that extra time, and you're not sitting in the car commuting. You can get more involved in your local community in better ways, and with your family, the health, well-being, the work-life balance. All of these things are so important. Getting the cars off the road, emissions, like, you know, there's so many things that regional development in terms of supporting co-working and remote working from hubs or from a selection of whatever people choose, and hubs are there to support when they're needed. That's the way it should be. But at the very heart of NACEC and what we're trying to achieve is build that culture and that community where when the corporates come in, they have everything that they need and it works for them, and there's access to startups and there's access to SMEs, there's access to university students who are studying or learning or training from the hub as well, because we're doing a lot of that over the past couple of years. There's access to something where you've got that kind of 5 or 6 key stakeholders that kind of feed into developing an ecosystem where we can then kind of learn from one another, create new jobs, create new opportunities in those regions. Yeah. So NACEC is not about taking people out of the city. Nobody wants to take people out of the city. I'm from Dublin. I have property in Dublin. I have interest in Dublin. I love Dublin, but I'm living in rural Meath. And right now I'm all about making sure that I don't have to sit in the car 5 days a week and go in and out of Dublin. I shouldn't have to. And I don't. And I haven't done that in years. But so people in the city who want to stay in the city should be in the city. But people who are traveling 20, 30, 40 miles a day because they couldn't afford to buy property in the city, and their life is still in the city the way mine would have been 12 years ago, and they don't have a work life and they don't have everything else in rural Ireland where they want to live and where their family and don't have time to spend with their family because they're sitting in their car, they should have the option and the choice to be able to work close to where they live, whether it's from a hub or from home or a combination of all of the above, whatever it needs to be. And the responsibility for NACEC and the hubs is to make sure that we create environments that can facilitate all of that in such a way that we not only facilitate what people want and give them the service that they need in a secure fashion, but we also, you know, grasp the opportunity that is obviously going to be there from bringing all these different stakeholders into a community or an environment where they can interact and learn and collaborate. We have a responsibility to figure out how do we make the most of that, because that's the creative innovation where opportunity for rural Ireland is really going to happen in the future. Not just creating a hub where you can rent a desk. You know, it's what do you do with the mix of all the different personalities and people and everything that come into these spaces.
Yeah,
that's what co-working really is about for me.
And that is so aligned with why we have Ireland Together here. It's really about, you know, getting the most diverse bunch of people together. And that's really where you get a little bit of a spark of imagination or creativity or innovation. And we've been encouraging members of the community to not ever feel like they're in competition with each other, because we have this ecosystem where, you know, you don't need to compete with each other. There's enough business for everybody to go around. So we're really supporting collaboration and that ecosystem, and even co-opetition where people might feel like they're in the same business, that they can, you know, stronger together than they are apart. So there's definitely, we're all singing off the same hymn sheet when it comes to why we're here. I have a question here in the chat box then, in terms of, you know, you mentioned you're not interested in displacing people from the city, and it's really about fueling that innovation or that sense of entrepreneurship around the country. Do you see or do you envisage that the local regions will have some kind of population explosion, or do you see any trends in people moving to rural parts of the community or the country with increasing rental prices or house prices? Is there any data around that yet?
But that's me.
Well, either of you. I was thinking with Gary, he'd be more focused on the rural side.
Well, I'll give you my thoughts on it. First of all was, okay, I moved to rural Meath in 2007, just pre the last crash. Paid top dollar for a nice little house in the countryside or whatever. Wished I hadn't done that for a long time, for a few years, but I've got over that, thank God. But even back then in 2007, and I was self-employed and running the recruitment agency and a number of other things at the time, and thought, this is brilliant. I can go to rural Meath, I can work remotely, work flexibly, run my business. But then everything changed within a couple of years, and that wasn't the case. I was driving up and down the road, begging and borrowing and doing whatever I had to do to kind of survive for a few years. But even back then, that was the quality of life, having lived and grew up in Dublin. I wanted something a little bit different for my family. You know, I just wanted a different way of life for work-life balance, health. All of them things were really important to me then, I suppose. And I think they were to lots of people that I knew, but they just didn't maybe take that leap, like going from the city out to rural Ireland and being willing to do that. Even back then, it wasn't so straightforward. I think it's an awful lot easier now. I think, you know, digitization of everything makes it easy for people to be able to work from anywhere, pretty much. And I think people will. It's not for everybody. It was always for me. It was always a dream and an ambition of mine to get out of the city and live rurally and whatever. I'm only half an hour from the city centre where I am here in the outskirts of Navan, which is still great, and I enjoy going back in. But yeah, I think a combination of house prices, which is always the main driver, a combination of rental prices. In terms of businesses, we do see businesses coming out into the outskirts, not too far from the city, but moving into, you know, I'll be giving out our shop for saying it, but to me, Meath, Kildare and Wicklow is like greater suburban Dublin. That's coming from a dub. Obviously, people from me, Kildare and Wicklow won't like that or think of it like that. But I see, because I'm one of them coming from the outskirts or from Blanchardstown, and my friends in Blackrock and, you know, Dublin West, everybody moves out into Meath, Kildare, Wicklow. Like, I know so many people down here that I knew from where I grew up in Blanchardstown. So that'll naturally happen anyway, because Dublin doesn't have the space for people to live healthy, kind of fruitful lives or whatever, and rear their families safely and the way they want. It's not practical. And also then in terms of the business, you know, if you're not high flying in the city centre and you can afford that space, maybe the options are, if we can create those options and opportunities, are to kind of expand out a little bit. But the suburbs or the Mid East region have to be ready for that and prepared for that. I don't know if we are at the moment, but we're certainly thinking that way. And I do see it. You know, the motorways are better, the roads are better. I was in Galway only last week, hadn't been down for a while, and you know, it's geez, the amount of time it takes to travel to Cork, even, which I did last month. So the road structures, like, when all of that is improved even more in the future, I don't see any reason why people can travel more freely, but they won't actually need to if they can work. That digitization allows them to do a combination. And I think that flexibility from the employer needs to encompass all of the above. And then that flexibility from the employee also needs to encompass all of the above. We both need to be able to, as an employer, with my team, we're super flexible, and you know what I mean? And I love that, because that's the way I am, very entrepreneurial. And I think that flexibility is very entrepreneurial. And I think people being more entrepreneurial in the way they approach their work and problem solving and everything else is good for everybody, even in the public sector. It should be everywhere. I'm a big preacher when it comes to entrepreneurial thinking and creativity. And I think, and it works wonders, because to me, entrepreneurship is really just not necessarily about success in business, but about flexibility and creativity and adaptability and resilience and all of these good things that we all need. And we're all learning from this pandemic. So I do see people taking control of their own lives and maybe moving out of the cities if that's what they want. Maybe if I had the chance and I had the opportunity, I'd be going back into the city if I could afford to have a place and do both. I'd love that as well, because I love it. And I love the hustle and bustle of Dublin and everything else, and I always will.
I'm the same. I'm 20 years in Navan. I'm an economic refugee, forced out of Dublin to go live in the suburbs before there was a motorway, way back when. But I'm still a blow-in Navan, so I'll never be a local.
If I could just add to that question, Joanne. So firstly, I suppose personally, like, I have a lot of friends who've moved to the region, so whether it be Cork or Limerick or anywhere else. So long term at purchasing houses down there, but they're still very much employed by their Dublin based employees. Yes. A lot of them are in tech, actually thinking about who's moved, but just personally, a handful of my friends have certainly started to do that. Looking at then the data, there was some house price data that did come out from the CSO on residential back in, I think it was April, May time. Based on the results for February, it showed that prices in Dublin increased by about 1%, but everywhere outside of Dublin increased by about 5%.
Yeah, and of course we're on aren't we on a rental freeze as well in a lot of places, so you won't see that change in the rents until that's over post-pandemic as well.
Yeah, so I mean, some of the rents for some of the schemes we're involved with in the city centre actually are under a bit of pressure. You do have the rental cap for kind of existing tenancies, but for the stuff like the larger schemes that are being delivered, there is a bit of pressure on rents within Dublin city centre. A lot of people moving either back home, either to different parts of Ireland or to different countries. So there's been a bit more stock released onto the market from a residential rental perspective, and that's actually increased rents a little bit within the city centre.
Yeah, I mean, I commuted up and down to Dublin for 7 years the only thing that kept me there was the flexibility of my employer, that I could get to work at 10 or sometimes 10:30. Whatever time I got there at was okay. It meant I worked later in the evening and I didn't get home until all hours. But I mean, that was the only way I could do it, because you've got kids to drop to school. And even if you leave Navan at 7 o'clock in the morning, you're still going to arrive at 9 o'clock. You're still going to arrive to Dublin at 9 o'clock. So I think until we get some kind of a public transport system, I think that works. I think the best thing that we can do for Ireland is to develop the rural community areas. There's a lot of support here for bigging up the regions, which is nice. We're saying we have to start thinking about the entire Ireland and not just the cities. So the Midlands is a little bit of forgotten about. Do you have any thoughts about that, Gary, from a NACEC point of view? I know there's a lot of money being poured into the rural communities at this stage. I saw it was a Kinnegad is getting like 18 million or something to develop like a library and a co-working space and an enterprise hub. There's some serious money going around the rural communities right now.
There is, and the reason we're working, you know, to develop quality standards, we have a national steering group chaired by Minister English and the various stakeholders on that group, Enterprise Ireland, Western Development Commission, the departments, and IDA, and Enterprise Ireland, and the NSAI, and more. And what we need to figure out, because what I've seen in the 9 years that I've been involved in the sector, and I would have used enterprise centres in Dublin myself to start and incubate businesses as far back as the mid-90s or the late 90s, and I found them to be fantastic spaces, for me anyway, and they work really well. But we need to, in terms of the professionalism and how we actually do it and understanding how to incubate and accelerate and whatever. So at the moment, there's big gaps between what some of the centres at the higher end kind of do or know how to do. Private sector, private hubs maybe have a different approach that's very kind of, I suppose, shareholder driven in the sense that they got to make money, and they can only be in prime kind of built up locations like city centres. You won't see many private hubs out in the regions like in small country towns or whatever, because it's very hard. The business model doesn't work. Unless you're running serious amount of training programs and consultancy and various other income streams or whatever to support that. So for hubs themselves, you know, it's great to see government finally coming on board and look, they always have, in fairness, recognise the importance of what hubs can do. And, you know, that's even more the case now as we come back after this pandemic, I suppose, and the public sector wants to get out and work remotely and stay at home or close to home. And so we'll probably see a lot of change coming as a result of this, whether that's good or bad, I don't know. But we can't lose sight of, again, I come back to, you know, it shouldn't be about taking from the cities regional development and bringing it back to the regions. It should be about the regions looking at their own USP and their own kind of pulling together their own clusters or innovation districts based on local strengths, which is what we're trying to do in Meath and the Mideast. It should be about the regions bringing in the expertise to build capacity within those regions, so that we're not taking people away or taking jobs away or taking companies out of the city. We're building capacity locally, rurally or regionally, and that expertise, so that over the long term, even our graduates or our students or my kids, when they grow up, don't have to go to Dublin. Well, they probably have to go to Dublin to be educated, but hopefully they don't have to stay there if they don't want to. They can come back to Meath and incubate their business there, or get a good quality job that pays them a decent wage in Meath instead of having to travel to the city. So it's not just about bringing remote workers or corporates or public sector employees back into the community. That would be great. And it gets people using local shops and coffee shops and all that kind of activity, and it's brilliant. And yes, we do need that. But we also need to create good quality opportunities and jobs for the future, new opportunities. And that's the big challenge for me for regional development in Ireland, not just creating spaces that when the next recession comes along, most of the businesses in those spaces will probably go belly up and those centres will be empty, and then government will be pumping more money into them just to keep them open, just for the sake of keeping them open for the handful of companies that are surviving. And they need to be sustainable, and they need to have a strategy and a plan built around quality standards that's connected into a global network of ecosystems, whereby we're not just selling to each other and interacting with each other and learning from each other. We're learning from everybody. We're plugged into everything, because that is the future. And if we don't have co-working spaces, and if rural and regional Ireland isn't thinking that way, we won't create those new jobs and opportunities. So remote working is amazing, and I love it, and I think it's great. But flexible working is really what it should be all about. And then regional development is all about the community, building the ecosystem, bringing stakeholders together, and creating new opportunities, learning from the cities and being better at what we do, like the cities. But our cities still need to thrive, and they still need to be successful, and they still need to do what they do and do it better in the future. But we just need to up our game also outside of the cities, and we need to, you know, build new opportunities and create opportunities and up our game and co-work properly. And like I said, when you've got that mix of all of these different people or stakeholders or whatever together, what are you going to do with it? That's where the magic is going to happen.
Yeah, and I think it's a really important point to say that, you know, we need to create the business that fills these enterprise centres with great people. I mean, I'm looking through some of the signed off funds here. So we've 8.2 million going into Cardona in County Donegal, another 9 million going to Stranlaran, Donegal, 6 million in Ballymahon, County Longford. These are all to develop enterprise hubs. 1.3 million in for the Nublis Enterprise and Digital Hub in County Monaghan, 2.8 million in Meath. So, you know, there's an enormous amount of money being poured in, and what we need to do now is start fueling the incredible ecosystems that make these thrive as opposed to just exist. You know?
Absolutely, it can't just be about creating space and renting space. These hubs cannot just be landlords. You know, that kind of make it easy, good quality workspace at affordable prices. That's what I used to hear 20, 30 years ago. And a lot of hubs still think like that and do that now, and that's what they think they're there for. But it's more than that. It is about creativity, innovation, collaboration, shared learning. It is about the environment, work-life balance, and so many more things. And it's about creating something. Like-minded people can create magic and do special things when you bring them all together and facilitate something. And it doesn't happen online, and it doesn't happen digitally as well. You know, you can tell probably by listening to me, I'm like a kid in a sweet shop when I'm around people. I get all excited and I can't stop talking, and magic happens like that. And I think lots of us are like that. And it doesn't really happen in the same way. Like, you know, there's other people listening to me talking now. But if we were in a room together or in a conference together, people would be throwing up their hands, people would be shouting out something, or people would just be butting in. And that's great. And that's when, you know,
100%,
you miss that.
yeah. You're absolutely singing from the same hymn sheet as us, because we, from the very beginning, we banned one-way webinars. We said everything in Ireland Together is a conversation, because, you know, that we're nothing without connection, and connection is what sparks our imagination and makes us, you know, think about new things and sparks new ideas. So Hannah, did you want to jump in there?
I was just going to add, I mean, it's one thing the government have actually got right, I think, by setting up the IDA and what they're tasked with doing in terms of bringing FDI into the country, and specifically channeling FDI into the regions. I think it's been a really positive thing. I think there could be more of it. But, you know, I get all their alerts and their job announcements and various other things, and they are actually doing a good job of bringing in lots of different companies from an FDI perspective, and setting them on a path into the regions, and not necessarily always just into Dublin.
Yeah. Just want to check if there's any questions from the audience. If anybody wants to put up a hand, you can just press the little reactions button down the bottom right of your screen. Not seeing anything, but please feel free. Louise will keep an eye on you. So we're coming up close to time. Do you have any last messages for us? Maybe Gary, if I can go to you first.
Yeah, I suppose it's hard to know what the future holds. I've had lots of meetings this week talking to people, and somebody said to me yesterday, Jesus, that's very pessimistic. And it's hard to understand what's pessimistic or what's realistic in the current climate, but I'm definitely not a pessimistic person, but I'm trying to be realistic in terms of expectation of what we can achieve locally here at Meath and what NACEC can achieve. And, you know, we were talking in terms of where we are in this pandemic, and I suppose maybe I was being a bit pessimistic at the time, and I was kind of thinking to myself, well, look, for all we know, as we come back into the winter, maybe history will look back and in 2021 we were really just at the beginning of all of this. I hope that's not the case, and I hope we're coming to the end of all of this. But in terms of opening up hubs and spending money on projects and building new hubs, I think we just need to be careful. And, you know, while it's very popular and it's very, you know, in fashion, I suppose now, remote working and co-working and all of this kind of stuff, at the end of the day, these projects have to be sustainable. Our future has to be, we have to take advantage of the opportunities that are there now to have more flexible kind of more flexible kind of working environments and futures, and do it right. We have a responsibility to get this right, not just for flexible working and our headspace and everything else, but also for the environment and for our children. So I think we're on the cusp of, as we know anyway, over the past 20 years or 30 years, massive technological change. But right now, I think we're on the cusp of something even bigger and better than that. And we all need to understand that, figure out what it is, and take on that responsibility and make the most of this opportunity to change our world, change our lives, the way we work, the way we support rural Ireland or rural anywhere in the world, the way we kind of think more diversely, and the way we're more inclusive, and you know, things have to be more balanced. And this is an opportunity while people are open to change on a level that I haven't seen in many years, to be honest with you. Like, I was gobsmacked last year, the amount of people I was able to get through to with wild ideas in relation to NACEC and getting money out of government and everything else. Everybody was just so open to so much. That's not going to last. That's going to finish pretty soon, within the next 6 to 12 months. And like peaks and troughs in the stock markets and in everything else, like, we go up, we go down, we go up, we go down. You know, I hope this is not one of them kind of downward spirals, that we'll get back up to some level of normality and we'll forget about everything that we've learned over the past 12 months and we'll just lose the run of ourselves all over again. So I think we all have a responsibility, especially those of us in positions of authority or whatever, where we can affect change in some way, to use that to the best of our abilities and you know, think long term, not short term.
Yeah, I love that. Sounds like a call to action. Hannah, what's your last thoughts?
I agree with that. I mean, I think Gary's hit the nail on the head. The change is, I think, the key point for everybody. From a real estate perspective, I think the world was already changing. I think that COVID has just accelerated and catalyzed the direction that the property was already going anyway. I'm having a huge amount of conversations with corporates and also kind of with investor clients, and they're all asking the same questions at the moment about this hybrid model, about workplace design, about corporate real estate, I don't know, organization, footprint, technology, you know, what changes need to be implemented. So, you know, there's a huge amount of questions being asked. I think the flexibility point, Joanne, that you were mentioning at the beginning is key, whether it be around kind of flexibility of workspace, so the kind of the liquid workforce and the work from anywhere workforce, whether it be flexibility in terms of the type of days that we have as well. I think that's key. And I don't think we can overlook other key points as well around sustainability. It comes up in every single phone call I'm having at the moment, with a huge focus on ESG, which, sorry, only the E is sustainability. We also need to not forget the kind of the SG bit of that as well, and the kind of whole social placemaking, community health and wellness element of ESG. Tech, another thing that also comes up. We were already undergoing a digital transformation. We work so differently now to how we did 10 years ago. But look what's happened in the last kind of 12, 18 months. It's you know, just propelled the emphasis on technology more than ever. And then, yeah, just I think finally, just to kind of think about people as the focus of everybody's strategy. I think people and the health and wellness point are going to be legacies of COVID for everybody in the workforce. And there's a huge focus on that now, whether it be reimagining the real estate that you're in, the space that you're in, commuting and getting to work. Just a big focus now, I think, placed on people and the value of people and interactions and collaboration, and how real estate can really help to benefit that.
Yeah, I think they're fantastic notes to finish up on. I think the call to action that I'm hearing from everybody throughout the past 4 weeks is, please not let's be the memory foam country, right? We don't want everything to just snap back to normal. We crave a little bit of what we missed from the past, and that's absolutely fine, but let's build back better. Let's use this as an opportunity to rethink how we would like to live. And I think that's a danger that feels uncomfortable for us, right? Because there's been this sense of obligation every day that our structure, we just get up and we get out to work and we go through the motions and we get our paycheck and we go on holidays. And you know, that 2-week holiday, or if you're lucky, that two-week holidays or whatever it is that keeps you going with from January to December, is supposed to then be your time for rest. And maybe rest and recuperation just needs to be, you know, built into our everyday life so that we don't need these 2-week breaks. Who knows what the future would hold? But I think the call to action from everybody is, don't be afraid to ask. Don't just assume that we're going back to the old ways. And if you feel that there's a better way, then stick up for it. So on behalf of all of us here at Ireland Together, for myself and Louise and Mindy who are on the screen, and Colin who can't be here today, as well as Morgan and Reagan who's just joining us this week, thank you so much for all the work behind the scenes. Thank you to all the panelists and all our keynote speakers, MCs and facilitators. You have been absolutely wonderful. I don't think this is the end of the conversation, but it does conclude this series, and I appreciate all the inputs from everybody.